In a move which had already been reported prior to the E-League Major, where obviously Fnatic would actually go on to finish top four, the Fnatic organisation has taken back in long-time players JW and flusha, who had left them after E-League Season 1 to go and play in Godsent. They actually also taken Crims, if you remember. And the key thing was, aside from at the very end of the previous lineup of Fnatic, where they made top four at the Major, admittedly I think a bit of a soft bracket, neither team, Fnatic or Godsent, had any real success, and neither came anywhere close to the success of the old lineups, where obviously the lineup that they put back together now, the five-man lineup now, had won 6 tournaments in a row when they'd first started out. The old lineup with Pronax in, obviously the greatest of all time, won 2 majors, numerous top 4 finishes, a number of, something like 12 or more actual offline tournaments. You go back in time even further, and the JW flusha Pronax era of long ago wasn't really an era. I don't mean era in the sense of like the NIP era. So I mean era in the sense of that's what the lineup was before the Olaf and Crims move. They obviously won a major themselves, so no one came anywhere close to this level of success. Now the swaps between the two teams since then saw initially Lekro was on Fnatic. He was then swapped with Crims, and he went back over to Godsent, and actually it seemed to work better for both players. Lekro played a lot better in Godsent, and Crims especially played a lot better at the end in Fnatic. But interestingly enough, both squads, for starting out at such a low level compared to their old glory, and not ever really getting a lot of success, by the end had improved a pretty decent amount actually. Godsent qualified for the major, which was absolutely not a guarantee. And even managed that crazy upset win on train over Australis, although Australis certainly helped them in that one. Also managed to eliminate Optic. Fnatic obviously went on to finish top 4, despite the fact that, yeah, I think they got the easiest, or one of the easiest quarterfinals draws they could have had. And I don't really think they were ever going to beat Australis in the semi-final. But still, top 4 in Major, obviously a very legit finish. Now, Fnatic continued to try and play the loose style, which had really been what had made the lineup before famous. This was a lineup which had seen the success of Envious, and obviously Envious had been the team who displaced Fnatic as the top team, essentially ending the whole Fnatic era by defeating them at Cluj-Napoca in the quarterfinals. Since they used that happy style of loose, to some degree run and gun, but mainly more like you play off individual skill, and you have a few defaults that you build out of. Fnatic tried to keep playing that loose style, that then with their next lineup with Dennis, let them win 6 tournaments in a row. Now, that had continued to work in Fnatic, even when they weren't winning anymore. They still always finished top 4, they were still very good, they could still do stuff like in their last tournament with JW and flusha, where they just blew Na'Vi out completely in the semi-final of E-League Season 1, playing that style, and on Na'Vi's maps, no less. So it's still a very effective style. The problem was, when Fnatic went over to having Lekro in the lineup, and they had this obviously brand new team, it didn't really work out that well. And remember, Fnatic, considering they were the better of the two, of Fnatic and Godsent, they weren't the ones who chose for that lineup to occur. It was the Godsent guys who'd left and gone over to Godsent, and that's why. The Godsent guys thought to themselves, oh, I wish we were playing with Pronax again, I wish we had real tactics again. Maybe they didn't like the system that Dennis and Olaf clearly wanted to play around. So Godsent tried to play the Pronax style. They had him as the in-game leader. And I have to say, that was even less successful because they were absolutely appalling on the T side, was that Godsent team. Go look at any of the eras they had when they had Crims, then when they had Lekro back. They really never got a reliable T side, and that massively hampered their map pool. And then add in that most of their players really underperformed. Fnatic players were just sort of like average and had a couple of good performances, but the Godsent players really underperformed, with the exception basically of flusha. He's the only one who was pretty good the whole time. The rest of them were all over the place. It took towards the end before JW started to get back. So if you go back and look at most of Godsent's wins, most of them do come out of big performances on CT side, and they nearly always require flusha to have a big game. So the new lineup of Fnatic is the same lineup as the previous one when they were in E-League Season 1 finals, with JW, with flusha, with Olaf Meister, with Dennis, and I forgot the fifth. Oh, Crims obviously is back in. So first things first, before we talk about that lineup, I have to mention that this lineup didn't have to be I mean, they certainly, after what they saw at the major, could have kept Twist. I might even have been tempted to do so. I will say, I don't know if Twist has the drive and has the killer instinct that he could go all out and win majors and stuff. That's still something that's very much yet to be proven. He's clearly a talent, but he reminds me in some ways of what Forrest was like in 1.6. Not in terms of skill set, not in terms of skill ceiling, etc., but in terms of like they have a mentality where like they clearly are good players. They clearly have confidence in themselves and they play well and people like to play with them, but they really seem like hit or miss in terms of performance, but almost with not much kind of metric as to why. Like it's not like they always fail in the big finals match, like famously people will say in majors, often Device failed in the semis and beyond, etc. It's not like that, and it's not they only dominate in the group stage like Nico has. It's that it really is almost just like you're rolling dice and you're going to see, oh, on this day they're amazing, right? Well, they do really well then. Like we had that map that Twist had against Australis, yeah, it looked awesome on Cash. But elsewhere, they just would have an average game and you'd think, well, is this guy really a killer instinct? With that said, his talent was clearly there. So I think it's a big statement that they're taking JW back, because JW is the obvious one you would have swapped out. Flusha, if anything, has remained pretty good in the Godsend era. Of all the players, he's the one who maintained his high level. He looks really dangerous again. He actually was one of the only players who maintained the same style when he went there. JW had to reinvent himself back to being some kind of an primary AWPer. So I feel like JW was the real question mark, and there were rumours behind the scenes like, oh, maybe it will only be Flusha who goes back. So I wanted to see what happened there, but in the end, JW and Flusha, for whatever reason, maybe they're a package. They've gone back. They're going to put back to the old lineup, the one that they won the 6 tournaments in a row. And you've got to say, that was a team that when they won those 6 tournaments in a row were very intimidating for people. They really made people scared to play them, because even when you played them on a map, you were better than them on. So I think back and I think of like Australis on Overpass, Katowice. I think of fucking Luminosity on Overpass at Katowice. I think of G2 at ESL1 Cologne on Train. These are maps where these guys, Fnatic, should not have been winning these maps, but they did through big Fnatic performances, big crazy individual plays, and through being Fnatic, putting that mental pressure on the opponent that somehow you're going to come out with a crazy miracle play, and then being able to do it as well. So that's always been a unique quality, and that's what we want to see. Will that occur in this lineup? Because, okay, Olofmeister was massively improved at the E-League Major. He was really quite an average pro for the last few months. In his time in Fnatic, since JW and Flusha went to Godsend, he was a very average player. He almost never was a big playmaker like he always was in his prime in Fnatic, in the lineups before that, and he never used to just carry the whole game. It was very rare he'd even have a good map. That Fnatic was mainly Dennis and Twist, depending on the era, that were doing well. Now, at the major, Olofmeister looked right back up there. Yeah, he didn't look like the best player on Fnatic. He didn't necessarily look like the superstar that we've seen in the past, but he looked skilled again, and he was having impact, and he was playing his style. He was winning clutches. He was making plays. He now looked like a player who had that confidence again, and actually looks like he has it in the server again. And all that injury stuff, we don't need to talk about it anymore. Crims was so much better at the E-League Major. He had been fucking appalling when he was in Godsend. When he came back to Fnatic, he'd have online games where he was good, but he still hadn't really got it back together offline. He was dynamite at the Major. He was doing... Him and Zipnix are guys where you don't look at the stats. You don't look at the ADR. You don't look at the KPR, whatever stat you want to take out. Just look at how many clutch rounds these guys win, how many big impact kills, how many times in the middle of a round where it's 5v5, someone attacks a site, they get 2 and call out the info quite clearly from how their teammate comes in, and delay the enemy a bit, and even though it's only 2 kills, it's in the middle of the round, it doesn't win the round, doesn't finish the round, doesn't necessarily secure you it, that ends up being the big play that decimates and sets someone else up to succeed. Crims was right back doing all that stuff, and he was a big part of the reason why Fnatic even had a chance to win that cash game against Australis, who in my opinion, Australis was a much better team in pretty much every regard. Now Dennis... I do think Dennis dipped a bit from what the level he was at in the past lineup when they had JW and Flusha, because at the time he was the best player towards the end of Fnatic then, but he's still fantastic on pistols. I think part of the reason why he's dipped a bit is it seemed like even though they were still running and gunning, it seemed like in-game leading took a little bit of a toll on him in terms of obviously he didn't have as many star weapons to use. And he didn't seem to go with the AWP as much, whereas towards the end of the other Fnatic, he'd been AWPing quite a lot, and he really was stressing that aspect of being the hybrid, because obviously Olafmeister was having his own issues with the AWP. So I still think Dennis has been amazing on pistols, and certainly has maintained the skill, still a pretty good player, so that's a good consistent piece there. And as I said, flusha was a carry in Godsend. He was doing very well, and he's got that old flusha intuition back again, where his timing on when to use it. It's crazy that Snacks has really come back to the fore and just does it every time now, because him and flusha both have that ridiculous sense for when to make the big ballsy play that'll work, and they both don't seem to get hit by pressure in the same particular way. Also both fantastic players at majors. And then the last player who did come in instead of Twist is JW. Now interestingly, JW, he did try to be a primary AWPer the whole time in Godsend. In fact, he even said like he was going to have to find the old JW. He was trying to reinvent that old style he had. Obviously, he'd played as a star player. He was the star player of the in theory, of the Fnatic that won the first major, even though actually like flusha kind of outperformed him in that one, Schneider. And he had his own issues on LAN at the time. It wasn't really until after the first French shuffle when he had that ridiculous couple of games in actually a brutal loss to Titan in the semi-final of DreamHack Stockholm in, I think it was like, was it October? No, it'd be September, I think, of 2014. That was when he really started to beast on LAN, and then he was very good, obviously, in the end of 2014. But if you remember, in the latter days of 2015, even though they were a championship team, his AWPing had really gone to shit, and he started to just not even AWP. He started to give it up to Olafmeister, who AWPed more and more. Then they got Dennis, so then he saw JW on the AWP even less. He became a rifler, and by the time he went to Godsend, he really had lost a lot. Now in Godsend, he started out primary AWPing again, and it was kind of iffy. Like, he'd have some good games, but he wasn't like a carry player. He certainly wasn't up to the level of what like Olafmeister would be able to do 6 months earlier. But by the major came and the qualifier came, he started to peak. And actually at the major, he looked pretty good as well. Him and flusha were the clear best players on Godsend at that major. And he didn't necessarily deserve to go out in the Swiss system. He played well enough where I thought on a different team he would have been into the playoffs and we would have seen what he could have done there. So it's quite a good sign that all of these guys are coming back together. With the exception of Dennis, they're all basically on an upward trend of their level. I'd say Crims is almost back to his best, admittedly from a small sample size. flusha has remained very good. JW looks like he's getting pretty good, and Olafmeister's pretty good as well. So with Dennis not being as good but still pretty good, I think they've got a great base here. This is the perfect time to do this move. They couldn't have known it because they planned to do it before the major anyway, but their timing is great for this. Now, interestingly, no one seems to believe in this Fnatic. I realise, as I record this video now, they've played some online games, so now everyone's like doing that idiotic thing where, like, if you just win an online game, people are like, oh my god, they're incredible. G2 lost another game. Shit, team, they're never going to... We're failed potential. I realise people are doing that idiotic shit, but regardless of all online results, I don't get this whole skepticism around this Fnatic. You look at all the players where they're at now. You look at the era we're in right now. You don't have to have super tactical Counter-Strike to win. Now, it's not like you have to do X, Y, or Z to win in Counter-Strike. You can have your own style. But I think the field is there where this type of a team with their players back in good form can be real dangerous. And then you add in the prestige factor where they've done it so many times and they're not going to be worried the same way. And the intimidation factor. This is a team that really can be dangerous. Now, sure, when they were winning those 6 tournaments in a row, that was with Olafmeister still extremely good, if not the best player in the world. We're talking about early 2015 here. But that was also with JW fairly gimpy, like quite kind of hindered in his play. And then in 2016, one of the players who suffered really during Olaf's injury actually was Crims. He kind of like lost his way a little bit as a player. Now both of those players look like they're back and look like the last few months have been good to them. So even though Olafmeister's not at a superstar player level, some of the others are back. And so actually I think the consistent level in the team at the moment looks better than when they were winning the 6 tournaments in terms of man for man, how well they're performing, how well they suit the role they're going to be set with. I think in terms of AWPing, now that Olaf's getting back up there and JW's improved his AWPing, they've got a lot of options. Now the last Fnatic, the one where they had Twist and then they had Lekro and then they got Crims back, tried to mess around with who the AWPer was, but that's because only Dennis was playing really well and they couldn't really figure out who was going to be the primary AWPer otherwise. Obviously Twist has done it before in Godsend. I mean, Olaf took it, but he wasn't really at a good level. Now, this is a team where they can go 3 different ways with the AWP, and it can be legit. We're talking about they can go to Olafmeister if he really is going to be back at a level. He obviously was one of the best hybrid AWPers of all time. JW is looking effective and hitting those JW shots. You've got Dennis, still a great all-around player. They can go any which way, but the key is they can do it almost like on a higher level than what Optic was doing recently. I thought one of the impressive things about Optic was they had players in NAF, who's obviously the extreme when we necessarily won in Warping, and you had Tarek and Mixwell, where they just picked it up depending on who was hot or which map, or whether you were on CT side or T side, or which spot you were at on the map. That's how they tended to decide who to warp. So I think that's what Fnatic can do here, and as a result, they can give teams a lot of different looks. Bearing in mind, tactically, they're not going to be super deep. They can give you a lot of different looks instead in terms of who's warping and where that's going to be. And you can't necessarily know round to round where that's going to be when you come in as the terrorist, or well, unless they're attacking on T side, obviously. Now, flusha, Crims, and Olafmeister, we know these are clutch players. We know these are players who've been fantastic at different eras in their times, and a bunch of them are at a good level right now. So that clutch factor also is going to make the individual plays be able to be converted. I always thought one of the problems G2 had last year, actually, is they had a lot of individual skill, or at least sent it in a few players, and they would consistently get a lot of that out, so they'd break into the mid-round and be in good situations. But unless it was shocks, they didn't necessarily have that much clutch factor. RPK got it together sort of towards the latter part of the year. Smith was always a liability to some degree. Body was just too young and wasn't really that sort of player anyway. And Scream's never really been like a monster clutch player, because his style of clutching really is just like one tap you in the head. It's not the shock style where it's like you just win clutches. You just know what to do and you always hit sort of like the high percentage shot. So I think they've got a lot of clutch players in this team if these guys are on their game, and that will make them very dangerous and hard to put away. And they have masses of skill. Now, you could actually make a case, obviously we'd need to see more games because some of these players were going off a level that was just one or two tournaments, but you could make a case that this is or is going to be one of the most skill-stacked teams in CSGO. If JW is really going to play at a decent level, they literally can be, in terms of the worst player on their team, the most skilled. They can be, man for man, the most skilled. This is a team where who else out there can match them in terms of skill? Okay, let's start out Na'Vi, because we know Na'Vi, every single player in theory has been pretty good or very good at different times in CSGO. They've got a lot of skill. Obviously, they're hindered by leadership issues. Australis, you've got to put in the mix right away, because Glaive has shown himself to be so good at fragging for an in-game leader that elsewhere in the team, they've got monster players. I mean, any other player aside from Glaive on the Australis team could be a top 2 player on any other Danish team and have the game built around him and be a star player. SK Gaming, I think with Phelps' addition, you've got to add in, because FNX was more of a clutch veteran type player in this era, because the rest of the spots are taken up. Now, it has to be said, if you've noticed, when Cold and Thorin are in their positions playing at a really high level, Fur tends to be the guy who seems to sacrifice a bit and just be more of a playmaker, but not necessarily the guy with monster fragging. So I don't know if Phelps can fit into that team and do what he did in Immortals and show that mad skill level, but clearly the base level of skill in OSK is very, very good for a team that we haven't seen play offline yet. And you've got to say the new G2 line clearly has massive amounts of skill, because if MBK is like your support player and Body's just a leftover 5th player, and then you've got Kenny S and Shocks, 2 of the most skilled players of all time, and then Apex, one of the most skilled entries. There's a lot of skill in that team as well. But you look at all these teams, the only ones that are actually established that we know what they play like is Na'Vi and Australis. At the moment, Na'Vi don't play up to their skill level at the moment. It's only really Australis who's getting the most out of all their players. So I think there's a very good case to be made that this team either is or is going to very soon be the most skilled team in Counter-Strike, this Fnatic lineup. The key for me in this team, bearing in mind I don't see them going very tactically. I mean, they've already said Flush is the in-game leader again. They've got the lineup where the skill is there. They like to play off individual skill. It's what they even tried to do with this last lineup of Fnatic, which I don't think was going to work at the major. And I'm amazed they made it that far. I'm not really when I saw the bracket. I actually had them beating Gambit, despite how many people thought Gambit had a chance to win that series. And I think the key for this team, to some degree, as it was with the lineup when they had it back together in early 2016, it's all about how they team play off each other. If Crims and Olaf have that legendary duo, if flusha and JW know how to play off each other, you've got so many pieces, so many skills, so many natural fits to roles, but also versatile players, that this can be a really dangerous team. The problem is, what broke them up before is, I think what hindered some of the team play came out in terms of the personality. You heard that like the interpersonal relationships were breaking down and people didn't necessarily want to play that way anymore, or they just played and they didn't have any friendship at all in the team, and so that made it sound like people were just putting in the bare minimum of practice and probably weren't doing any kind of research or whatever. So I feel like if those issues are resolved, which was the issue last time, then it unleashes them even more as a team. And so for me, I think what happened last time when they broke up is they had that whole grass is greener on the other side syndrome. That's what fucked with them. They thought, I want to go elsewhere and play here. You know what, maybe I can reinvent this and then get that team back up to a higher level. And they were a team that was so used to winning, and winning came so easily to them, that when they weren't winning anymore, and they weren't winning consistently. And obviously, there were 2 majors where they made top 8 and top 4 and never won, and weren't really super close to winning, quite frankly. In that world, it wasn't enough for them. I mean, they're a team with such heritage and such a winning philosophy that it wasn't enough to finish top 4 at ESL One Clone and do pretty well against Team Liquid, but not win the tournament and not even make the final. They wanted to change something and win. So I feel like now they've got this lineup back together. This is a lineup which has never, at an offline final, finished below top 4 except once. It was the MLG Columbus, where we all know Olaf had a ridiculous injury. That's the only time they ever placed below top 4. So they were very good before. Now, in theory, they probably appreciate each other more. They've seen what it's like to be the fucking Fnatic and Godsend and not even close to what it used to be. And this is a key detail. To watch all the other teams come up. To watch Australis become the best team and win major. To watch SK take 2 majors down when you used to beat these guys every time you ever played them in a series. To watch Virtus.pro have their rise up again with a janky old team where they've had to mix up the roles again, and they still don't have the most skilled team and they don't necessarily have the best team in any respect, but they just do it out of veteran skill. You've seen all this stuff go on. You've seen these young teams come up. Cloud9 have been winning tournaments while you've just been fucking around. Optics come and won a massive tournament while you've just been fucking around, been making finals. Now the hunger, I think, is there. And these guys want back what was theirs, and they want to be the kings again of Counter-Strike. So I think the key detail here is there is not, as of right now, an utterly dominant team in this era, or one that suggests it will be, because every team has some sort of a flaw to them. So Australis look like they could be incredible in terms of consistent. They look like a team who could place top 4 at every event and make tons of finals and win, like 1 out of every 3 titles and win some other big titles and certainly contend for more majors. But there's still a little bit of choke in them, or there's a little bit of nerve issues, or they can be put to the test at times, and that's going to give teams a chance to upset them. You've got to look at Virtus.pro, obviously, will always lack something in terms of skill or performance. They rely so much on snacks and then someone else to join them, and it's always up and down as to where they get those performances. It looks legendary when it works, but it doesn't look so cool when it's falling apart like it did on Train against Australis when they're on CT side. You look at the G2 lineup, no one really still knows how that will all work out. Obviously, it's been a long time since those teams had actually legit been in position to go deep in majors. They've been going in groups the last few. Na'Vi obviously have a massive leadership question still on their minds. Yeah, SK Gaming has to introduce Phelps and then figure out where the other star aspects fit in, and then if they can win again. It's been a long time since they've won. Obviously, ESL One Clone is the last big title they won. There's a lot of question marks out there. There's a lot of very good teams, by the way, but as a result, this is the ideal time for Fnatic to come in with their style kind of set, their mentality set, a great past mind, winning mindset, a lot of skill, people all in position, and then now to come in and start intimidating some of those teams, start bullying, start playing very well again. So I think this is a team that can win titles, certainly. I think this is a team that can do real damage and can be very competitive with pretty much everyone out there. So the interesting thing for me is, what's the map pool going to be, though? Because actually I think Dust 2 going out, in a sense, might have hurt this team. So, okay. Right off the bat, I have to guess Cash and Cobblestone are going to be very good, because it was very good for the last Fnatic lineup when they had JW and flusha. It's been good for their team even when they didn't have JW and flusha. These have just been maps that have always worked for them. Their Cobble was fantastic, particularly. I expect those two to be strong maps for them, and obviously they're very much in the map pool and being played. Losing Dust 2, I think, is where it's going to be all about Inferno. How will the new Inferno play? If it plays at all like the old Inferno, then this Fnatic should be back in that sense as well. That should be a good map. So that would give them 3 potentially strong maps if they can be good on Inferno. That's a great basis right there. The question mark then is, after that, the 4 remaining maps, there's not really any strengths there. Because you'd think they're probably not going to play Nuke. They haven't. Fnatic continue to not play Nuke. Seems like they just don't want to play Nuke. They never played it in the lineup when they had JW and flusha previously. So as a result, I imagine they'll just keep banning that. So we've got 3 maps left over. We've got Overpass, Mirage, Train. Now they could by force of will win games on Train. But the last time they were vaguely decent or good on Train was Pronax era, back when Olaf Meister could just single-handedly make insane plays on T-side. That's not really going to be reliable, I don't think, here. Perhaps they can play it because it's a map that's opened up a lot more on the CT side, actually, interestingly enough. So if you can be as good as they are and as clutch as they are, maybe that can help you work. Overpass and Mirage, I think Mirage should be a map that they should have chances on. I think the old Fnatic lineup, or rather the previous one, the one they had Twist and then actually Lecro, at times they looked all right on Mirage. That seems to be a map where, in history, some of their players were good on. We know JW obviously used to like it a long time ago. We know the Fnatic lineups of old, late 2014, used to be good on it. And that's certainly one they're going to mess around with. Overpass with Pronax, yeah, they really established that aggressive CT long A style offense where you push up and you get information and then you pull back, and that way you force the terrorist staff to go very slow. That's why everyone goes so slow on that map nowadays. You don't just play in the sites. But that's been a long time since they were good on that. That's been a pretty iffy one. So for me, they just have to get one of those maps that's doable out of Overpass, Mirage, and Train. I would guess it's probably going to be... I mean, I may be Train in terms of they've got the skill to make CT side work. Mirage is probably a better bet in terms of tactically. I could see it working T side where you can run some basic defaults and just play out of it with aggressive players. Overpass I don't really see working for them. So I think Nuke's probably going to remain a ban. This isn't a team that has to have a super deep map pool. They can win some of these maps off skill, and if they have, it's all about how Inferno goes for me. If Inferno goes well and it plays like the old Inferno, then I could see them having 3 strong maps and being a real dangerous team where they're going to win titles, and they're certainly going to go deep in a lot of these tournaments.